Well, thank you and good afternoon. Greetings from the Pacific Northwest, where the forecast is for snow and ice tomorrow, which we don't do very well in the Portland area when it comes to snow and ice. So, might be staying in New Mexico a couple of days just to enjoy. It's nice to see the sun. So grateful to be here with you today, and a little bit of time that we're going to have together, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. And I've been married to a wonderful woman now for almost 30 years. And in 2018, she looked at me and she said, "You know, we're going to move someday." And she started to pack boxes on that day in our home. And then in 2021, 3 years later, she looked at me and she said, "This is the year that we're going to move. It'd be great if you came with me." And fortunately, I am married to a woman who knows that I have a very small comfort zone for change. I like things to stay fairly consistent. She would say boring. I like to say loyal. She'd say predictable. I like to say faithful. But I like things kind of how they are. And the reality is, all of us have a comfort zone. All of us as human beings have a tolerance level for change. And we're going to spend just a few minutes this afternoon sharing a little bit about the journey that I've been on and learning about how to manage change, both personally and professionally. The irony is that this is probably not going to be anything new to those of you, particularly those of you in leadership, because as the saying goes, change is constant. It is constant. We are different today than we were yesterday. We are different than we were this morning. This room is different than it was the last time it met. People are here that weren't here before. People are not here who were here before. Change is constant. So you don't need somebody to come up here and tell you about that change is constant. The goal for today is to try and maybe give you a little bit of a model and maybe some talking points to kind of help navigate change. And to do that, I'm going to start out with just a little bit about my background. It was already touched on, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. And why is that important for starters? It's not about a resume. It's really about understanding the context or the environment. Sometimes, particularly when we've been in the business for a while, we become so accustomed to the context or the environment that we're working in or a part of, we don't even recognize some of the forces of change that are happening around us. And we don't understand and maybe take into account the context or environment of those that are either we're trying to help guide through change or that are maybe resistant to the change that we're trying to deliver. So I just want to give you kind of a quick overview because as I mentioned about our comfort zones, we have chosen in our positions of leadership to take on the comfort zones of others, right? Marty Linsky in his book, Leadership on the Line, says that leadership is disappointing people at a level they can tolerate and absorb. Leadership is disappointing people at a level they can tolerate and absorb. I don't know about you, but it's not very often people walk into the boss's office and like, man, that was an amazing policy you put out yesterday. You know, we are so encouraged with X, Y, and Z. I spend a lot of my day trying to help manage disappointment and keep people engaged at a high level so we can continue to deliver a high level of service. But it helps to have a little bit of context of whoever you're working with and who's ever chatting with you. So as mentioned earlier, I am currently the 51st Police Chief for the City of Portland. Well, my career actually began in 1988 with the Oregon State Police. I'm not going to walk you through 35 years of history, I promise, but it began in 1988 as a young college student. And back then they had a program called the Oregon State Police Cadet Program. And we have a very vibrant state park system in Oregon. And so the state parks in the summertime in particular can grow to become basically small cities, several thousand people. And they wanted to have a security presence or a law enforcement presence. So they hired college-age students. They put us through an 11-day academy. They gave us a state police uniform, a state police car, and a ticket book and sent us into the parks to be the law for the summer. And I shudder now at how many family vacations I likely ruined because there are a lot of park violations out there that many unsuspecting campers are not aware of, but I was very skilled in knowing all the rules. And by golly, you take a 19-year-old kid and give him that much authority, and we definitely enforce those rules. What they didn't provide us was anything other than what I mentioned. So we had a car that said state police on it with lights on it. We had a uniform with a state police badge, and we had a ticket book, but we did not have anything else. We didn't have a gun. We didn't have handcuffs, pepper spray, tasers didn't exist then, nothing. And so if we needed somebody to actually be arrested, if somebody broke the law, we had to call for the real police, a state trooper, a county sheriff, somebody who would have to come from probably 20, 30 minutes away. So it wasn't the safest model in the world. There's a reason we've probably discontinued it at this point. But, here I was one summer with my partner, another college student, and we get a call to a family disturbance in the campground. And we're like, we're the police, we'll go, why not? Not knowing what I know now, that family disturbances are some of our most high risk, most dangerous calls that we go to. So we pull into the campground, and as I'm getting out the driver door, I'm met at the door by the suspect. The suspect is bigger than me, drunker than me, and angrier than me. And he stands over the top of me, and he looks at me, and he says, if you didn't have that gun and badge, I'd kick your ass right now. And I'm thinking, don't look past that badge, because there ain't no gun. Right? One of the things we're going to spend a few minutes on this morning is talking about how we go from perception to perspective. Perception to perspective. It's so critical in change management. It ties into the reason why we need to have context. We need to understand the environment. We rely upon our perception to get through the day. This is not a bad thing. This is human nature. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, he talks about, we perceive the world as we see it, not as it is. But we have to, because we make so many decisions throughout the day. We move at such a pace that we cannot stop and evaluate everything. Some of it we just rely upon our skill, our knowledge, our ability, our history, our strengths, our relationships, whatever it might be. So I do not want to convey that having to make decisions based upon our perceptions of things is a bad idea. But the reality is, when we have tough challenges ahead of us, particularly when it comes to business or personal relationships, sometimes we need to be able to move into a different perspective. That man knew, based upon his history and perception, many things were right. It was a police car, it was a police uniform, he knew he was in trouble. All those assumptions he made, including the fact of believing that I had a firearm, is really pretty consistent. Fortunately for me, he did not have a perspective. He had a perception, and 30 minutes later, the real police showed up and were able to take him into custody. So we're going to really focus on that a little bit. My first day on the job at the Portland Police Bureau in 1990, so State Police in 88, Portland Police Bureau in 1990, I was walking to the elevator to go to work, and I met at the elevator by this old guy. Now, old guy is probably my age today, but back then he seemed like an old guy. And he says to me, kid, how much time you have left? And what do you mean, how much time do I have left? I'm thinking, I just started, And what I know now is cops, because we have a pension system, you can do this to any cop in America. You can go to them and say, how much time you have left? And they'll be like 6 years, 12, 10 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, 6 hours, like we're in prison or something like that. But because we're eligible at a certain time and age of service, so he's asking me, how much time do I have left? I'm like, I don't know, 8 hours. I just started. He goes, no, in your career, how much time do you have left? I said, well, today's my first day. And he says, if I had that much time left in my career, I would slit my wrists and do push-ups in the ocean. And I think to myself, what? What in the world are you talking about? And the reality is, I have learned that we don't do a good job of helping our men and women survive the career of policing. We've done a really good job of helping them survive the violence of policing, but not the overall. We lose more officers to our own hands than we do to actually felonious violence. So we're trying to do a better job in our profession in helping us deal with not just the external, but the internal challenges. And that's what today's going to be about. As we talk about navigating change, we're going to be talking about really what's happening more inside here. As a leader, historically, I'm always out here, looking out here. Where are the threats? Where are the risks? Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? But really, in the last several years, I've come to realize that it's more about what happens in here. And leading in the city of Portland, certainly not without its challenges, and I'm happy to share some of those stories and experiences with you if we have time today or you have questions. 2020 saw 180 days of continuous rioting in the wake of the George Floyd death. We have a long history. Some of these photos go back, 10, 15 years of different areas of civil disobedience, public order. And the reality is that Portlanders are proud people, and we like to express our First Amendment and our opinion on things, which I'm very supportive of. Also trying to manage the rights and respective responsibilities that the city has around public safety. And it's an ongoing challenge that we're currently even facing today, but it's an opportunity that I gladly accept. When the mayor came to me in 2023 and asked me to be the chief, I was caught a little off guard because I had retired in 2019 as the deputy chief. So 29 years of service, retired 4+ years. The mayor approaches me in 23 and says, hey, the current chief's stepping down. He's still on my team. He's a dear friend of mine. I'm not running for re-election. Crime is at an all-time high. The city's transitioning to a new form of government. No chief that I know would want this job, so that's why I'm asking you, because I don't want them. And so I stepped into that role and, currently serving in that position, and really grateful for it. But as I was listening to the video at the beginning of this presentation around family business, I thought you may have a tougher job than mine. I have a tough job, and we definitely consider ourselves a family, but the reality of some of the challenges you face, I'm very appreciative of. So this guy tells me, hey, there's no way he would start his career over again. I was pretty discouraged, but I had another old timer come up to me and say, you need to have something to do outside of police work. If this is your only thing you do, it'll eat you up. So look for other alternatives. So I chose the relaxing profession of college football officiating. So for the last 25 years, I have officiated college football, the last 15 in the Pac-12, now known as the Pac-2. I stepped away this past year when I was asked to come on in 23. I was still officiating, and being the chief of police and officiating was really challenging in terms of just time commitment and energy and so forth. So in 2024, I took the year off, and I'm right now in real time in the process of evaluating whether I'm going to be able to continue to manage both. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to, spend my Saturday afternoons in the fall getting encouragement and feedback on a lot of the decision making that I do, as well as from the 60,000 fans and the 50-foot jumbotron. But it would be remiss if I didn't articulate a little bit about where I'm coming from in terms of how we manage change and what I have learned around change. And finally, and this is probably especially poignant for those of you in the room, that I think the closest the people that we learn the most from are those closest to us when it comes to change management. This is the Day family. It's a few years ago and a few pounds ago for me, but Lorna, I already mentioned, we'll have 29 years next month. If she sticks around, it's looking like a pretty good opportunity there. And our lovely daughter, Natalie, she lives in Los Angeles, is married, has the son, has a husband, and has a Disneyland pass, so I don't think we'll ever see her back in Oregon. And then our son, Samuel, and you'll notice Samuel has a prosthetic on his left leg. And in 2010, he was diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma, which is a rare bone cancer. And unfortunately, the surgery, the treatment is 9 months of intense chemotherapy with surgery to remove the tumor from the bone. But his tumor, they weren't able to get it all. We made the difficult decision to amputate his left leg below the knee. He actually became a very confident surfer, snowboarder. He thought being an amputee was kind of cool. And in junior high, it led to a lot of good practical jokes. Like when you have a substitute and you walk up to the front and your legs turn backwards, and he's like, hey, what happened to my leg? So he got a kick out of it. Sadly, after 6 years, we lost Sam on August 27th, 2016. He was 15 years old. So when we talk about change and we talk about change management, sometimes we affect change as leaders, and sometimes change happens to us. And there's all kinds of events and circumstances and things that make that happen. And my goal today in the first few minutes is to just really speak very practically and very candidly about my journey. And I could just as easily be sitting in the chairs with each of you, maybe not trying to run a family business, but trying to figure out what are the next steps forward. How do you manage personalities? How do you manage the bottom line? The city of Portland's looking at a $100 million deficit this year. I was asked to do a $21 million cut to my budget this year, potentially. It's all being considered. How do we manage people's expectations and the anxiety that runs around that, whatever it might be. But I could easily be sitting in your chairs listening to a speaker. So please take what I share as just a guy on a walk, trying to pass along a little bit about the journey that I've been on. And hopefully it'll apply in some of the areas and work out. And I'm certainly, like I said, open to questions as we get towards the end. But that's a little bit of a background of me. What you don't really need me to do is highlight how significant change is happening in the world today. It's really happening at a record pace. And that's not just some phrase. There's studies that show that, about the amount of time it took to get a TV into every, living room in America versus the amount of time it took to get a cell phone in everybody's hand in America. There's things are happening so quickly today for all of us. And these are just some examples. You could put anything up here. The world is getting to be a smaller place. You don't need me to remind you that, the things that are happening now around the globe are impacting you right here in Albuquerque. They're certainly impacting us in Portland. There may have been a time where that seemed kind of distant or far away or maybe intermittent, but really almost on a daily basis, we're seeing the challenges as we manage through the changing landscape of the international. Of course, the economy, I've presented and spoken and been with many leaders over the years in the business world, and some who have led through really difficult economic times, but consistently hearing over the last year or two just the uncertainty, and that is the bottom line. That is what, keeps us afloat. So there's certainly change happening there. We'll debate the coronavirus and our response to the coronavirus for the next 100 years. There'll be reports written and studies done. But the reality is the change that occurred because of that, remote work. I mean, I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my life. And, it is absolutely part of the zeitgeist today. I am an all about being in person kind of guy. I love to have meetings in person. My admin knows when we meet in person. It's absolutely would be archaic or even dangerous of me to require every single person to be in that position now, because we would just lose people. I don't know how to navigate that exactly, but we're trying to figure it out as we bring people back to work. We try to accommodate. But, that wasn't a conversation you had 5 or 6 years ago. And people are like, oh, I want to work from home 2 days a week. What are you talking about? Now it's like, well, let's see how we can work that out. Maybe we can make that happen. I want to work in Albuquerque, but I know your business is in Portland. I had a CEO call me recently because his board is on him to get everybody back to work. It's been 5 years since, we got to get everybody back to work. His CFO moved to Austin, Texas, and it's a great CFO. We love this guy. I've been with him forever. But he says, hey, you bring me back to Portland, Oregon, I'm out. So he's trying to educate his board, like, what do I do? This is an amazing guy. He knows the system. He's my partner, but, so just real life challenges. And I really want to present a little bit of an agnostic view to these things today. I don't want it to be about whether it's right or wrong or good or bad. It's just change. It's just reality. And it's coming at us, and we're having to deal with it. So how do we do that? How do we show up? The social justice movement, certainly of 2020 and 21 and 22 has impacted and really forever changed policing and the way that we show up in a variety of different ways. So these are just some examples. And the thing that I've had to learn and remind myself of is the more I know, the more I don't know. One, I was gone for 4 years, and I have plenty of examples I could give you that I won't take up your time, where I've had to go to others and say, hey, I don't know. I need to know. What do you think about this? What is this information? It maybe doesn't change my decision, but that humility, leading with that vulnerability, gives me openness to other conversations and provides me information that I didn't know that I needed now to be effective. And the final thing that humility does is humility offers other people dignity. When you lead with humility, you offer other people dignity. Prior to going back to work, I was traveling quite a bit, speaking and consulting around the country. And so I talk a lot about managing change, but in the end of the day, I really like things to stay the same. So I'm an Alaskan Airlines kind of guy. I fly Alaska. If I'm going to go somewhere, I look at the Alaska website. I don't know if there's better routes or cheaper flights. It doesn't matter. I fly Alaska. I'm like the best customer in the world. And if I can't fly Alaska, then I fly American because they share partnerships, right? And it allows me to maintain my status. And my status allows me to sit towards the front of the plane, which I like to do, get on, get off early. As I said, I preach all this change crap to you, but really at the end of the day, I like things to stay just as they are. So I'm on a plane here recently and sitting in row 6 or 7, appropriately so, and a pilot gets on and sits in the spare seat next to me in the middle row, which I always love it when a pilot gets on because I figure if something goes bad up front, we got a backup plan. So the flight attendant starts her safety briefing. Him and I are both on our phones, probably playing Candy Crush or doing something critical. And then he puts his phone down and he starts to watch the safety briefing. And I'm thinking, buddy, if there's anybody on this plane who should know how to buckle their seatbelt, it's you. You are a pilot, right? But he watches the whole safety briefing. So I watch the safety briefing. It's about 2 minutes. I've timed it since. After the safety briefing's over, he goes back to his phone. I go back to mine. A week later, I'm on a plane. I'm sitting in row 6 or 7. The flight attendant starts her safety briefing. I put my phone down. I watch the briefing. At the end of it, as they're putting their stuff away, she leans over. She says, you get an A for the day. I said, what are you talking about? She goes, you don't know how often I stand up here and all I see are the tops of heads. And for you to take a minute and pay attention to the safety briefing, I really appreciate that. I said, well, I didn't, it's not something I came up with. I had to admit, I learned it from a pilot, who actually demonstrated humility, right? Really demonstrated humility. He didn't have to watch the safety briefing. There's nobody on that plane that knows safety better than him. But he provided that opportunity. And I have found You know, in the words of Mother Teresa, she said, humiliated and defensive people rarely change. Humiliated and defensive people rarely change. And when we're the leader, when we're the boss, when we're the one in charge, or we're trying to affect change, or change is happening, the more that we can show up with humility to guide others is critical. It allows you to take risks because you might make mistakes. Great book. Put it on your list if you haven't. I've read it twice. It's a great walk-through history of people who have committed to, significant decisions, all the way from, presidents and others on down to local businesses, and they won't come off of it. And mistakes were made, but not by me. Why we justify foolish beliefs, bad decisions, and hurtful acts? We get stuck in protect. And we're not able to see, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe there's something. Maybe not. Maybe you need to protect. Once again, that's not meant to be a negative. It's not about putting yourself down. It's not about not having confidence. It's not about, being willing to shrink from hard decisions or conflict. But it is the ability to say, hey, maybe there's something here that I'm missing that I need to consider. The other behavior I want to touch on is curiosity. And this is my friend Kevin Jones, and this is the Red Door Project. He's the one that has taught me so much around the Protect, Expand, Evolve model. Kevin is the co-founder with his wife Leslie of the Red Door Project, which is a theater company in Portland. And in 2014 was the year that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And so in 2015, there were also several other deaths, African-American deaths by police officers in 2014, 2015. So these group of 7 black playwrights from around the country got together and they said, we're tired of this, we're tired of racial profiling, we're tired of these incidents. We are going to write our story and tell our story about police and racial profiling. So these 7 playwrights wrote 7 monologues, and they're first-person experiences, and they are hard-hitting. They are powerful, in your face. To say they're not cop-friendly would be an understatement. And they launched that around the country in 2016, and so various theater companies picked it up, including Kevin in Portland, and it was called Hands Up, from Hands Up, Don't Shoot movement that came out of the Ferguson incident. And so Kevin is doing this show around town. He's got actors, and people are going, and somebody says, you should talk to the Portland police about this. This is something the Portland police should see. So Kevin and Leslie come into my office. I'm the captain of the training division in 2016. They sit down, and before they even can say anything, I looked at Kevin and I said, if you're coming in here to tell me cops are a bunch of racists, you can leave right now. Probably not my finest community policing moment. And Kevin looked at me and he leaned across the table and he said, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Curiosity. The willingness to be curious. The first time in my 25-year career in this particular arena where I'd ever had somebody who I had already gone after. I was in protect mode. I'm like, I'm not here to listen to this. And he was willing to get out of protect mode and say, tell me more about that. So we had a conversation about the show and about, what it was going to go like. I was non-committal. I went home. I told my wife that night about it, how I got this foolish offer to go to this ridiculous event. And she said, we should think about that, which in my marriage is code for get your jacket, we're going to the show. So we did. And it was exactly what I anticipated. I was not in uniform. I was in civilian clothes. It was 2 hours of this first-hand experience that was very, very critical of police. And the lights come on, and I'm half a cheek out of the seat, ready to get to the door. And then Kevin and Leslie come out and do a facilitated discussion with 200 people in this theater in Portland. So, we need to work on practicing the art of curiosity. What is it that maybe we're missing? Are we considering all the various options? Does this person maybe have something to offer? Maybe not. These are difficult behaviors to demonstrate. We can't do them every moment of every day. I don't want to make it sound like you need to come to a grinding halt. I work in a very fast-paced profession that requires a lot of decisions made, sometimes with very little information. But more often than not, particularly on the big issues, when we can be curious about ourselves or curious about others, we can take people from protect to expand. The third behavior I want to focus on as we wrap up here is in the area of empathy. And it's something we can throw around, but really, truly being able to demonstrate empathy. When I was in the Mounted Patrol Unit in the early 90s, we were on the north end of town. We'd get on the horse and we'd ride into downtown. And we would do police work. We were in uniform. And it was always a great challenge of mine to try and find, catch bad guys riding on a 1,000-pound brown animal going clippity-clop down the sidewalk. It's really hard to sneak up on people, but we managed to do it. And so I was a young officer, very focused on enforcement, very focused on making sure people went to jail and were held accountable. And I had a sergeant who'd been in the unit forever. His name was Dave Poole. And Dave used to go downtown, and he would go to the city parks, and he would spend time with the young people. We didn't really have homelessness as a term back then, but we had young people that were living on the streets. These are usually, teenagers. And they would just frustrate me. I'd go down and listen to their stories and on, their excuses. I just didn't have the time for it. But Dave would go down there as a sergeant. He'd sit for 2 or 3 hours in the park. He'd talk to these young people and hear their stories. If they need to be arrested, they had a warrant, they run away, whatever, he would take action. But mostly, he would just spend time with them. And I was in the unit 4 years, and after a while, I'd be walking down the sidewalk downtown, and some 20-year-old would stop me, and they'd be like, "Hey, is Poole working?" I'd be like, "No, he's off today." "Well, you tell him I'm clean and sober." A few weeks go by, a month go by, somebody'd stop me. They'd be like, "Hey, is Sergeant Poole working?" I'd say, "No." He said, "Well, you tell him I got my life together." And this would happen regularly, and I finally stopped somebody one day. I said, "What's the deal?" And he says, "Well, when I was this, snot-nosed kid in the park, he used to be the only one who would come down and listen to all my stories and all my lies and everything, but he was always just there, asking questions and listening. And it made a difference. I just wanted to know. I just wanted to say thanks." Now, I can tell you, we have not ended crime in downtown Portland, much to my disappointment. Although it is down 18%, so I'm proud of that at this point, but we have a long ways to go. But I know that lives are changed because of Dave Poole, because of the time that he spent. The other thing about empathy that allows us to do is empathy allows us to move from perception to perspective. We talked about that a little bit ago, move from perception to perspective. A quick example of that is when Sam was sick, he had numerous surgeries. One surgery he had required an epidural. They got done with the epidural, they got done with the surgery, and they took his catheter out. Well, unbeknownst to any of us, his bladder was still asleep. And after several hours, Lorna noticed that Sam hadn't gone to the bathroom. So she said, "Hey," to the nurse, "I don't think Sam's peed in a while." She felt his abdomen, her eyes got big. She said, "Oh, there's way too much urine in his bladder. We've got to get that out immediately. We're going to insert the catheter. We can't sedate him. We just have to do this right now." And Sam's eyes got big. My eyes got big. And she went out to get the equipment. And he's about 14 or 15. Natalie's like 17, 18 at the time. And just as she leaves, my phone rings, and it's Natalie. Now, Natalie, as I said, she's 17, 18-year-old teenage girl. I didn't know she knew you could talk on one of these. She'd had a phone for years, but we'd only communicated via text. So the fact that she was calling me was like a red letter day. And, of course, she called me, and she's crying. She says, "Dad, I've just been in a car accident." And she'd just been in her first car accident as a young driver. So she had backed into somebody in a parking lot. Fortunately, she backed into a school teacher, not one of hers, but somebody who understood teenage girls and the trauma that goes with that event, got her home. She was safe. She's like, "Dad, I really want you to come home." I said, "Well, your mom and I are kind of busy here with this deal with Sam. We'll get home as soon as we can." Nurse comes in. Sam's like, "Mom, I want you out of the room. I want Dad." One of the agreements we had with Sam, when he had a hard thing to do, he could grab our wrist and squeeze. That was his coping mechanism. If something hard, he could squeeze our wrist. So he says, "Dad, give me your wrist." So I give him his wrist. So the nurse is going to work down on this end of the bed, and of course he's all over the place. She says, "If you just relax, this will go much easier." He's like, "Relax? Really? This is not a relaxing process." And he's getting more and more upset. So I'm talking to him, and I'm telling him I love him, and I'm leaning in, and I'm over his head, and I'm telling him how brave he is and how proud I am and his son. I'm so hard. His journey's been so terrible, so unfair. What I didn't realize is when he grabbed my wrist, he grabbed with his fingernails, and they were now starting to draw blood on my wrist. Now, I'm highly sympathetic to what my son is going through, but this hurt. So in the process of all this, I kind of gently take my left hand just to adjust it, at which point my sweet, loving son looks at me and says, "Get your fucking hands off of me." It's not typically how we roll in the Day household. That's not how we talk to one another. That's not necessarily what I would expect in terms of our father-son relationship. So we got through the procedure. We got the urine out. Lorna came in. I went home, met with Natalie. The next day, Sam comes home. I put them both on the couch. I said, "Hey, your dad learned something yesterday." I said, oftentimes when I would put the kids on the couch to have a conversation, Lorna says I treat them like suspects. At the end, I'd be like, "You're free to go." She says, they're your kids, right? They're not. But I said, here's what I learned yesterday. I said, Natalie, had that accident happened in any other context, your dad's response would have been the typical dad response. Did you check your mirrors? Were you on your phone? How many times have I told you backing accidents are, we all know the drill. All of us that are dads, we've practiced the speech in our head because we all got it. I wrecked 2 cars before I was 21. We all got it, so we just pass that on to our kids. In light of what was happening, I'm like, you know what? It's a dent in a bumper. We'll fix it. We'll take care of it. Life goes on. I looked at Sam and I said, Sam, that's not how we roll. That type of language is not how we roll. We don't talk to each other. We don't talk to others that way. That's not appropriate. If you're going to take a shot at the king, that was a pretty good time to do it. But you only get one of those. And so just know that, that's going forward. I want us to have some clear expectations. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, I've been hearing that word on the bus and I've been waiting to use it. I said, well, like I said, you picked a good time, but at the end of the day, that's not going to be an ongoing part of our conversations. But the reality is, when we can demonstrate empathy, we can move from perception to perspective. We can put things in perspective. We can see things in a different light. And we want to move from protect to expand. We want to create options. We want to create opportunities. We want to create choices. We need to be able to figure out how to get out of that perception and get a perspective. Doesn't mean your perception's wrong. I said earlier, I'll say it again. Very agnostic about all this. We get too hung up on whether it's right or wrong. And then, Bob, are you saying there's no such thing as right or wrong? No. I have strongly held beliefs. I'm not here to tell you that there aren't things that are important, there aren't truths, there aren't right and wrongs. I absolutely have strongly held beliefs. But in many, many areas, I'm learning that there are a lot of areas where there's room to demonstrate humility, curiosity, and empathy. And that oftentimes can take the temperature down. It can create new avenues. It can create new options and new things to explore. The final behavior that I want to talk about, and it centers around this guy here. This is Duncan. He is the most hopeful creature on the planet. He is our golden retriever. If I had time right now, I would ask you to give me, what are you hopeful for? What do you hope for? It's a difficult question when you think about it. It could be, I just hope Bob shuts up in a few minutes. It might be you hope for world peace. It might be that you hope for your kids' health. Whatever it might be, you hope for your business success. You hope for a clean transition. Whatever it might be. What are we hopeful for? Oftentimes when I speak to business groups, they refer to hope as not a strategy in that book. And he does talk a little bit about hope, but it's kind of seen as too squishy, too kind of difficult, kind of too out there, it's not very tangible, can't really point to it. What does it mean to be hopeful? And I would argue that hopelessness is a defense to change. Hopelessness is a defense to change. That oftentimes when we are in challenging situations, people become, obstinate, difficult, resistant, afraid, whatever, because they just don't see a path forward. Napoleon said, leaders are dealers in hope. Leaders are dealers in hope. And we learned this firsthand with our son, Sam. When Sam was diagnosed in 2010, he had about a 75% prognosis of survival. When the cancer returned in the summer of 2012, it dropped to about 25%. And when it returned to his lungs in 2014, we knew we were in the very, very, very deep end of the pool. And so we made a conscious effort and decision early on that we were going to be hopeful. But I mentioned to you about behaviors. Behaviors demonstrate our values. Behaviors take activity. So hope for us is not about just sitting around. Hope is active. Hope is moving forward. And I'll give you an example. In 2012, when he had this reoccurrence, and we actually were in Houston, Texas at MD Anderson for some special treatment. My wife and him relocated down there, and I went down to meet her. And we've been on this journey about 2 years, and Lorna had learned that pediatric cancer research is woefully underfunded in this country. Only 4% of the national funding goes to pediatric cancer research. More adults get cancer than kids. Sam's disease is 300 kids a year. Breast cancer is 1 in 5 women. If you're going to make a drug and it's going to cost you X number, hundreds of millions of dollars, it just makes sense where you're going to put your time and energy. And we've made great advancements on the adult side, and we're grateful for that. We have several family members and friends that have benefited from that. Once again, not a negative, not a criticism. But the reality is, unbeknownst to many of us, including us at the time, pediatric cancer has largely been ignored and is almost exclusively dependent upon philanthropy. The most recent drug that Sam was treated with in his first year was created in 1982. He was being treated from drugs from the 1950s, which are highly toxic, and over 90% of kids who survive childhood cancer die or succumb to other illnesses in adulthood because we poison them at such a terrible rate as young people. So she says, there's some stuff happening around Ewing sarcoma. I would like us to try and do some fundraising and put some money towards this project. It's $50,000. And in my loving way, I said what I've said to her before in the past: no way in hell we could do that. We don't know anybody with that kind of money. We don't have that kind of money. We got all these doctor bills. I don't know how we're going to make that happen. And she says, fine, I'll do it without you. And then that year she raised $100,000 to put towards pediatric cancer research. We ran it through a nonprofit in Texas. We did that for a couple of years. And then we lost Sam. And she stepped out of that space for a while. And then people came back to her in Northwest and said, hey, we think, you were onto something here. You have a vision. You understand doctors. You understand researchers. You understand families. You have a passion. Would you be willing to do something here in Oregon again? And so in 2018, we formed the Sam Day Foundation, of which she's the executive director. And in the last 5 years, 6 years now, we've given out, with almost coming up on 7, we've given out over $2 million in grants in Sam's name. With our large event coming up on March 8th in Portland, we're going to have almost 500 people at a local hotel for our yearly gala, as well as other events. And it's hope in action. It's not foolishness. It wasn't ignorance. We didn't walk around and think, oh, we just need to believe that Sam's going to survive and just, come on, let's just push harder. Hope is active. It's not optimism, and it's not denying the reality of what you're facing. When we would meet with doctors around the country, and we got treatment in Seattle, Dallas, Houston, Santa Monica, we would sit with doctors, and they would want to tell us immediately how bad things were, and Sam was in all those conversations. They'd want to tell us how bad things were, and we would look at them, we'd stop them right in the middle, and we'd say, listen, we know. We're in the deep end of the pool. We're educated people. We get it. We're not asking you to cure our son. We are asking you to be hopeful. Just be hopeful. Because every day with hope was better than sitting at home and just waiting. Every day with hope, to know that somebody was working on something, to know there was a strategy, to know there was an opportunity. And those 6 years that we fought, we wouldn't give those back for anything. Absolutely, we want to be hopeful. But it is something that's moving towards a goal. Hope brings influence. Everything that you hope for, when you think what I hope for, requires action. Right? You have to do something. We don't hope for things that are certain. Tomorrow's going to be Thursday. Nobody's hoping tomorrow's Thursday. It's what you're hoping for is a little bit uncertain, and it requires action. So I'm not a big fan of optimism, but I am a big fan of hope. And Lauren has demonstrated that in so many ways. The reality is, folks, there's nothing that I'm sharing with you today that maybe you haven't heard or considered. I'm highly sensitive to the experience and skills in the room. None of this is meant to be prescriptive. I'm really just a guy on a journey trying to figure it out. And I could easily, as I said at the beginning, be sitting with each of you today as we try to navigate change, using a model that I have come to rely upon and appreciate so much through my friend Kevin and his teaching and learning, as well as applying at least those 4 core behaviors. Being humble, being willing to take risks, ask questions, offer other people dignity, being curious. What is it that I don't know? How can I be curious in a way that's not intrusive, that's not demeaning? It's not like, why the hell did you do that for? But, hey, tell me more about that. Being curious about myself. Why am I having this response? What is happening right now in me? What am I afraid of? Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe my brain is actually signaling something I need to know. Or maybe I've just told myself a story about something, and now I'm responding to that story, and I haven't really taken the time to figure it out. And then to have real empathy, genuine empathy, not just feeling bad for people, but really moving from perception to perspective. And above all, I encourage you to lead with hope. Don't be afraid to be hopeful. Not a false hope. Don't deny the difficulty and the challenges that lie ahead. But absolutely, I think we need to be hopeful. Thanks so much. Wish you the best. Be safe. I know you had a 1:30 stop, but I can take questions for a minute. But if anybody has to run, that's fine. But tried to make sure we were done by 1:30.
So how do you apply what you just talked about to being asked to cut your budget $21 million?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I said earlier, none of this is down to a science. I mean, I've certainly had my passionate responses. And I am very protectful of the Portland Police Bureau. And one of the ways that I apply this is I'm clear about that, right? I'm clear that I'm going to be very protective of the Police Bureau and protective of the Police Bureau budget. I'm on the record of that publicly, and the mayor has heard that, the city council's heard that. They will continue to hear that. But I also know that this budget process is over the course of 3 or 4 months. It doesn't get finalized until May. I know that we're operating within the city, and so there's a lot of other competing interests. And so how can I show up through humility and vulnerability and curiosity to at least have an understanding? I mean, it makes total sense to me why public safety needs to be a core value of any major city and any community, and it leads to many positive results. But, you know, to just stand there and pound on the podium and demand without being able to be curious and to learn, and also be curious about the organization. I've had this conversation internally a lot. As great as the department as we have, and I would put us up against anybody, and I'm going to visit with Albuquerque tomorrow. I know Chief Medina well. He's a good man. He's a good leader, and I have a lot of respect for him, but I still think PPB is the best organization in the country. But the reality is, you know, we aren't always right. We have areas we can improve. We've got areas where we could cut costs. We have areas we could be more efficient. And so, you know, really taking the time internally to sit down with my chiefs and leaders and say, okay, I'm going to fight like hell on our behalf, but you know, we have some exposure that we need to recognize and own that and be aware of it. So it's really, you know, being able to hold that ground. None of this is like to be timid or to shrink away or to hide, but just how can you show up differently? Anything else? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was awesome. Thank you.
fantastic.
Jocelyn Gorman.
Q&A at the end, see if they want to.
that he developed became incredibly lucrative, and his father sued him.